Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to The Great Retention with Camber Parker, sponsored by the YoProKnow. I'm Camber, your young professional expert and founder of the YoProKnow, where we bring you the answers you need to know about how to hire and retain the best talent, starting with the young professionals you work with. There's a lot of young professional fish in the sea, but how do you catch them? And what do you do once you reel them in? That's where we come in. Today, I am so excited to have JD Solomon join us, founder of JD Solomon Inc. and owner of the nonprofit Communicating with Finesse, joining us virtually from Clayton, North Carolina. JD and I met earlier this year at a conference where we were on a panel together speaking on the topic of communication. This was a lot of great rapport, as I like to say, and we've stayed connected ever since. JD has a lot to offer in the space of communication and has made a name for himself in his respective industries that he works in, and he'll tell us all about that today. If this tells you anything, his tagline on LinkedIn is how to get your boss's boss to understand by communicating with finesse. And I loved that, and I felt like I had to include that. So, JD, I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, and thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Love the work you do and the gap you fill between organizations and young professionals. It's great.
Well, thank you, and I'm excited to dive into this conversation today. First, we're going to start with what I like to call a lightning round. And so just answer in a couple sentences or less. What is something that is not on your resume? So something that people wouldn't know just by looking at your resume.
So on the personal side, I'm a longtime baseball coach and the organizer of a travel baseball association. And I'm also a sailboat race captain and the founder of a sailboat racing team. So both of those kind of point to this organizational building and being able to work with different kinds of people.
Yeah, that makes sense. I did not know that, though. I love that I now know that about you, and now all of our listeners do, too. What is your favorite modern workplace tool?
Well, got to give you two. I'm going to give you Microsoft Excel. Microsoft Excel is a tried and true number one business software in the world, and most people don't know that it can do everything that PowerPoint can do. So all the graphic capabilities and everything's right in Excel. The other one that I use, kind of more modern, is an AI tool called Midjourney, and it does a lot of my graphics. It's a large language model, but does phenomenal work just producing graphics for me.
Great.
And in a small business, I can't afford all those resources, so I've got to do some of them myself.
Very smart. Love that. Thank you for sharing too. Can you tell us a lesson that you learned as a young professional?
Probably number one was your network matters most. And I learned that when I was in graduate school, working at the same time, and I did an analysis of the engineering industry. It's kind of like your work, Camber. We got to do a lot of different things with interviews, and I learned from executives who all told me, keep a strong network, and that has served me well throughout my career.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, JD. I definitely can relate to that and think it's so important no matter what generation you're in, right? Give us a little bit more background on you that we might not have covered in your intro. So this is a great time to talk about both JD Solomon Inc. and Communicating with Finesse. So just give us a little taste and then we'll dive into the real meat and discussion today.
Well, JD Solomon Inc. is where I make my money, I guess you should say, and other people do. Communicating with Finesse is my passion and something I'm really excited about. And it's exciting because I get to meet a lot of young professionals, experienced professionals, everyone trying to be better communicators and facilitators. And so we do a free webinar every month. We have guest posts from young and from older professionals. And I also get to look at just tens or hundreds of presentations and reports for people and really meaningful collaboration. It's really a rewarding community to be part of, and glad I founded it. It's a really great organization.
And remind us when you founded it. How long has it been in existence?
The beginning of 2022. So we well over about a year and a half now.
Great. And just so people are familiar with what industries you work with, can you tell us a little bit more about some of those industries that you've gotten plugged into with your work with both entities?
Yeah. My main entities over the career has been water, wastewater, transportation, local government, state government, chemical industry, mining industry, pharmaceutical industry. So really out there doing a lot of work as a reliability engineer, and now trying to help technical professionals be better communicators.
Yeah. And I think that's really relevant because a lot of times those industries are getting left without these resources. And I think that it's amazing that you can kind of fill in that gap. But that's also how we met, right? Was through a water resource conference. And so I'm very grateful that you're in that space because you've certainly just been a great resource and support and mentor to me since we met. So I'm glad that we met through that industry. So today, let's get into the real meat of our discussion. But thank you again for giving more of a background on that. We are talking about the young professional generation, of course, which is Gen Z and Millennials that make up the ages 21 to 39 years old in the workforce. They are going to make up 2/3 of the workforce by 2030. So help us set the stage by talking about what these two massive generations look like as employees in the industries that you just mentioned. What is happening right now?
What I see out there is really three barriers to careers, communication, and collaboration. The first one is a language barrier, and being a technical professional, it's not it's expected that I know people from around the world, so we have to get through that barrier. We also have a barrier that's very important related to impairments, and those are mainly hearing and seeing impairments. And most young professionals don't realize that between 10 and 25% of their audience has some kind of hearing or visual impairment. And then the third one, last but not least, is the one that we share. And that's the generational gap that's created and the generational talking. And it's really interesting that way, Camber. It's what I see out there is really is the younger generation going to have to come to the older generation, or is the older generation, because of technology and the way things are changing so fast, going to have to change business's practice to meet the younger? And it's still very much what I see. I don't know, you probably have the same experience. It's very much in the swing right now.
Yeah, and I mean, there needs to be a meeting in the middle, and that's what we're trying to do at the YoPro is, we have these intergenerational communication workshops, as you're aware of, and it's getting people on the same page. And really, it's a starting point, a starting conversation for, we don't have to agree with each other, but we do need to respect each other, and we need to respect where our differences come from and why we are the way we are, from our very early years, and how that's transferred into the workplace. So for us, it's, it should not be this who's trying harder to accept the other. It should just be some meeting in the middle. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I sure do. And it's beyond even the workforce retention and recruiting. It goes into things like root cause analysis and after action reports, where the older generation, as an example, we're used to bringing people into a room and having that one-on-one kind of dialogue to get to the bottom of what's going on. And what I've seen in my practice is a lot of the younger generation that's a little too confrontational to a lot of people. And when you start asking for not just their emails, but for their text to recreate the timeline, they really get a little jumpy. So not everybody, but enough of it to where we've got to rethink how we do some of our traditional quality, reliability type tools and assessments.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you finding in the industries that you're working with, are they struggling to attract talent right now?
Yes, struggling to attract and to keep the talent. We've got older generations that are coming off the hopper. And where the gap is for a lot of my organizations is in the technically trained areas where people have to have certifications and licenses. They're not seeing as many of the young professionals get certified or trained as early in those specialties as we once did. So,
well, what are you expecting as far as the impact that I just mentioned? We're having this surge of young professionals, and then a lot of the aging workforce is exiting. And then you also mentioned that recruiting and retaining talent is hard in these skilled positions. What kind of impact is this going to have on the workforce in these industries? Are they going to have to make more people do more work, or less people do more work, or what is that going to look like?
I think you're going to see a lot more of the older people find second or third or fourth careers, which means that really older of the fifth generations is going to stay working longer as these younger generation folks come to power more. And it's going to increase a very much a different dynamic in the workforce than we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
And I think some of that gap is I think organizations are stuck in some of those old stereotypes and myths about people. And you do a lot to break that down, I know. But some of it has to be that all the generations have to work better together to have more empathy. I like to say they don't understand each other, but the hard reality is it's empathy. You've got to be able to constantly put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
Yeah.
Even for communication, you have to do that. So.
Right. And that's a great segue into my next question. But before I get there, empathy, having just a human touch is really, I think, what might be missing in the post-pandemic world, right? There's a lot of people that don't have that capacity anymore. It's amazing because we can do things like this, right? We can have a virtual recording of an episode and it's amazing. But when it comes to communicating about the tough conversations at work, having that empathy is important. And I feel like sometimes it can be lost over a camera. So let's talk about communication, JD. How has work from home, and I even gave myself a better segue there. How has work from home and a hybrid workforce impacted communication, both in the industries you support and beyond? First, you can tell me how it's impacting it just from a general perspective, but because our topic today is young professionals, tell us how that might be impacting them in these industries.
Okay. So I'll bridge back or rebridge, I might say, Camber. The E, finesse is a seven word cause and effect relationship. And that first E in finesse is empathy. So it's fundamental to communication and effective communication. Yep. On the question of the work from home workforce and I'll put it this way from probably best way I can explain it from a facilitator standpoint. Is that's having an effect in that space too, because I worked for an international company for about 15 years, did a lot of virtual facilitation of meetings and groups. When COVID hit, everybody went home, so I had to really even, in fact, sharpen the skills because we're all working from home. Now we're back live, but guess what? We're really not. The number one facilitation format is hybrid. And those facilitation experts, and maybe I'm one, but we all think that's going to continue because the workforce is going to continue to not be at every meeting. If you have 5 or 6 sessions for problem solving or whatever, they're always going to be in and out. Now, it makes one big difference that I see, and it overlaps with this working from home, is we've got to get better with the virtual platforms. Because even in hybrid, and what a lot of organizations didn't do well during COVID was really roll out the training for those virtual platforms. Now that it's gone back live, a lot of them have forgotten it altogether.
Yeah.
But if you start talking about our younger workers working from home, they need those virtual platforms. And so whether you're on Teams or Zoom or Skype or even some modern ones like Slack and Discord or Circle, all of these things have their little nuances. Yeah. And teams use them different ways. And so organizations have got to get better at teaching it. But guess what? The young professionals have got to take the responsibilities too, because there's no way the organization can train you in everything.
Right.
So the young professionals really have to, in this space, this work from home hybrid space, we've got to be better at those kind of platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that. And the fact that you said the number one facilitation method is hybrid right now. Companies are seeing, it's not even, we can't even just predict it anymore. We're seeing results that companies are losing good talent because they are in office 100%. And not all of the methods are going to work for everyone, right? So if you're a young professional and you've only ever known working remote, going in office 100% is not going to be a good fit for you. But there are a lot of people that want that flexibility that hybrid can offer. So I love your point. Young professionals have to kind of take the ownership of that if they're going to be these future leaders, and they've got to take it on their own time and figure out how to really use virtual to create a hybrid opportunity for teams that is going to take the company to the next level. Is that kind of what you're saying there?
Yeah, because working from home or working remotely is harder than working in the office. It has the benefits of some personal conveniences. But when you're in the office, there is a certain, humans like humans, and we have all kind of nonverbal cues we use. So if you're going to work from home or hybrid, you've got to really, really be better at communicating, not worse at it, right?
Yeah.
So I agree.
Completely agree. Thank you for adding that. So let's talk about communicating with finesse a little bit, and maybe it's a good opportunity for you to just share that those acronyms, right, with everybody. Tell us first, we know that it's all about supporting professionals' career goals by teaching and educating them on soft skills, which is so important. Tell us more about this mission and how you support these efforts.
Okay, so it goes back more than a decade when I was really looking for the next new thing. And we would do these side-to-side presentations about how we did the analysis and also how we communicated it. And people, the ones about the communication, people went crazy. They came back and said, I have decent tools. They're not great. But what I really need is the tagline, get your boss's boss to understand. And through that process and writing the first book, right, my first book, which is more about vertical communication.
Love that.
We talked about finesse and those 7 parts of finesse, cause and effect. And then that led to how do we be better facilitators in the second book across more with our peers and with our problem solving groups. And so that's kind of my journey. But the need is really driven by this, if I can, for just another minute. It's driven by, and I work a lot with technically trained young professionals, right? So they're medical, they're engineering, they're science, they're computer programmers, they're all those things that need certifications and licenses. We spend the first 8 to 10 years really trying to figure out how those hard skills we learned in academia really apply to the real world. And then somewhere in that 6 to 10 year window, we get shuffled into managed teams and groups and projects. And we spend the next 15 years roughly really working 40 to 50 hours a week trying to balance hard skills and managing people. Somewhere about our late 40s, we figure out, God, it's really about the soft skills. That's what makes the difference. And Canberra, I know that because when I do these 4-hour and 8-hour training, there's always at least one person, usually 2 or 3, that said, I wish somebody would have told me this 25 years ago.
Yeah.
But at Finesse, what we're really trying to do is boil all those tips and approaches down into something that project managers, that young professionals, even older professionals in a second career can get their hands around without just spending a crazy amount of time doing it,
Yeah. Nope. Soft skills are so important. And I love that you are helping train these technical young professionals. You're helping them learn this now as opposed to 40 years down the road. And so I really applaud you for doing that. And I'm trying to take a little note from your book, right? And try to make sure that's part of our information that we share too, that soft skills really matter, particularly when we're talking about communication, right? Communication is the number one factor that influences young professionals to leave a company. It's the number one factor. And so if you don't have that as a soft skill, then you're going to really set yourself up for failure in a way. So that needs to get really touched on early on in your career. So when we first connected at the Confluence conference, which again was that water resource conference back in May, our panel was about internal, external, and intergenerational communication. What are the key findings that you have learned through your career about different types of communication, such as these 3? And what do you believe young professionals want and need to be successful in the workplace based on the young professionals you've worked with in your career?
Yeah. First of all, I'll probably repeat what I said at Confluence is that, it is a big myth that young professionals are not good communicators, because they came from a text generation. The best communicators I actually see are some younger professionals, and probably 20% of young professionals I see are better than anything we had in any generation before them. It's just a myth that we need to tear down.
I don't hear that very often.
With that said, there's still probably 50 or 75% of young professionals that do need a little bit of help with the communication. but it's a bad stereotype. And I know you try to tear that down a lot. And you can't treat everybody the same all the time if you want to keep these good professionals. Back to these rock stars, these young professionals, the companies have got to take better care of them because you can't treat them all the same. You can't rule by the stereotype. I would say the second thing would be that the technical professionals, for the same reason, some of the best that I've ever seen are people that are technically trained professionals at communication. And I think that's because we deal with a lot of difficult problems with complexity and uncertainty. And if you're going to be good in this business, you've got to be a good communicator, even if you're technically trained.
Right.
Now, like young professionals, right, you still got a lot of techies that need this help, this training and so forth. And so that's another thing that I've found is you got to break that stereotype down too.
Yeah. I love that, JD, because again, you don't hear that very often, that the people that you think are really good communicators are actually young professionals that you've encountered. And so thank you for being a champion. We all need to be champions of each other is how I view it. So again, regardless of generation, I should be a champion for you and vice versa. If you believe in the work that we're doing, and I certainly do for you. So thank you for sharing that. We've touched on this a little bit already, but I kind of want to start wrapping things up by asking, as a growing number of young professionals enter the workforce and we see this rise of Gen X and baby boomers that are retiring, where do you see the biggest challenge from your respective industries?
And I think this is across many industries, just not just mine, but there's a real lack of mentors out there that are good communicators for these young professionals. And so I think the push from a young professional has to be to really push in and say, if you want to keep me, if you want to retain me, find me some good mentors. When I talk to executive managers, they try to push this kind of training, kind of learning on the job, communication training down. But when I ask them, Camber, I say, how many of your 6 direct reports are good communicators? They'll tell me only about 2, only about a third. So they're almost being derelict in their duty of pushing it down to non-communicators to teach young professionals how to communicate. And I think that's just a huge gap that young professionals have got to push in and say, this is really important. Let's not hack around with this thing. Let's do it right.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because it kind of makes me think of another question. So I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball, JD. I hope that's okay. When you work with companies, what are you finding are the biggest errors when it comes to recruiting and retaining talent? There are a lot of business leaders that are listening or watching this episode who are really looking for those tactical ways to recruit and retain. So have you seen any errors? Have you seen any successes when it comes to communication in those processes?
I think what I see is and I hope you'll agree with this, you probably see it too, but a general awkwardness with social media and how to reach the younger generation. But the companies know to try it, the HR people and some of the technical managers, but they're really bad at it, right?
Yeah.
so they need to be better at it with social media to attract and retain. There's a piece of it that they've probably got to do better at again, back to this gap analysis about, are they putting little hurdles in? And you've taught me a lot of that too, Camber, just in the short time we've been here, that there's inadvertent things that you say and do that really cause you to stumble inadvertently. Yeah. And I don't think enough companies pay attention to that review or audit or whatever we call it, to have somebody like you to come in and really help them and say, these little things really are stumbling blocks that you're not even aware of. Right. So it's all that probably to say it's too much of a cookie cutter approach with recruiting and retaining sometimes.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the social media, because obviously that's something that we love to share with our clients and our audience. If your social media is not authentic, it's not reaching the next generation. And that's low-hanging fruit that you can use to attract and retain. And that is a form of communication, especially with this generation. So you have to know how to do it right. And so thank you for giving us that shout out there. But before we wrap things up today, JD, we've talked about a lot in a very short amount of time, and I would love to give you the opportunity to share anything that you don't think we touched on, or if you want to expand on anything before we wrap things up.
No, just really thank you for having me. And we could probably do some other segments in detail, but I'm really pleased with the ground you cover. You do a great job with this.
Thank you.
Appreciate you having me today.
Yeah, well, I'm so happy that we met back in May, and again, just very appreciative of you, and I'm so excited for others who are watching and listening to find you at Communicating with Finesse and see if there's some opportunities there. So, JD, once again, thanks for being on the show.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us on The Great Retention with Camber Parker. Before you go, remember this. Young professionals make up nearly half of the workforce today and are expected to jump at a rapid pace in this decade. What will you do to help them become the great leaders we need for our future? Join us next time for more information on how to recruit and retain young professionals. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcast. And don't forget to share with your coworkers. We'll see you next time. Thanks again for watching.